Hi, everyone. Welcome to this IDA Insight Hour webinar, just giving people a few minutes to join. Welcome, everyone. Just hang tight for a couple minutes while people join. Feel free to introduce yourself and the organization that you represent in the chat. Giving people one more minute to join before we kick off. Great to see so many introductions and different employers in the chat. All right, giving people just a few more seconds. All right, I think on that happy note, we are ready to kick off. Welcome everyone to today's IDA Insight Hour. I'm Kristen Tua, I'm the communications lead at IDA, or the Employers Initiative on Domestic Abuse. We're a network of over 2,000 employer members across the UK, and our mission is to equip employers to support all of their employees impacted by domestic abuse and to share best practice with other employers. We endeavour to bring about constructive change, leading to a society where survivors thrive and where domestic abuse is not tolerated. Today's Insight Hour is a bit of a special feature as it forms part of our campaign that we've run this September to spotlight Black experiences of domestic abuse and to equip employers to support their Black employees. There's been a strong appetite among our employer members for more awareness and more guidance on this topic, and it's also something that the IDA team feel passionately about. We've been incredibly lucky to have collaborated with brilliant experts, specialist organizations, victim survivors, and employers from the diverse Black community on this campaign. We've been posting daily on our socials to raise awareness of the unique challenges the Black community faces in accessing support. And we've developed a bespoke guidance resource that provides employers with a solid foundation to make their domestic abuse response more inclusive. So please see the link in the chat for access to the campaign resources. We're going to take questions from the audience at the end of the session, so please use the Q&A box to ask questions throughout. You'll also have access to the chat function, which is going to be managed by one of the IDA team. And as ever, we ask that you please be mindful of the impact on others and what you choose to say in the chat or on social media. But we do encourage everyone to post on LinkedIn, Blue Sky, or Twitter from the event, and please tag us using #IDA.org. We're going to be recording this Insight Hour and sharing it on our YouTube channel within the next couple of days. And we appreciate also, finally, that domestic abuse is a challenging topic. So please feel free to step away from the webinar and seek support at any time. Now I'm going to ask our distinguished panel to introduce themselves briefly. Could I start with Sandra?
Hello, I'm Sandra Pollock. I am a member of the IDA Advisory Committee on on this topic is one of the things we talk about. I am also the founder and director of Open Mind Training and Development. We focus on leadership, inclusion, people development, and I sit on a number of other national boards as a non-executive director. Lovely to be here. And also, I will be moderating this hour, so I'm looking forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Naomi.
Hi everyone, so my name is Naomi and today I'm going to be talking to you as a survivor of domestic abuse. Well, as a child victim survivor of domestic abuse. I'm also an IDVA and a trainer and I have an organisation called Rethink Abuse. So yeah, I'm here from that perspective.
Thank you, Naomi. And now the team from Hosanna.
Hi
Hi,
everyone.
good.
I love that we're greeting each other at the same time. My name is Christopher. I'm the Chief Vision Officer at Hasana, and we're the National Gender-Based Violence Support Service. And outside of that, I am also Domestic Homicide Chair, and I sit on the Youth Justice Board.
And I'm Hope. I use they, them pronouns, and I am the National Training and Engagement Lead at Hasana, advocating for Black femmes, doing outreach work, engagement, training, and all of the front-facing stuff in the organisation. Outside of that, Hasana also provides advocacy work, has therapeutic services where we offer free therapy to survivors of abuse. And then we also have, we do outreach work, we do festivals, we do things that are proactive and preventative as well as responsive. So that's what Hasana does as an organisation. And we support everyone from the age of 13 upwards. So we're inclusive of that. We use the term Black femmes specifically because we support girls, women, non-binary people, and trans survivors and at-risk youth as well. So that's why we use the term Black femmes, and I think it's important to mention that, particularly in the current climate.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And last but not least, Dan.
Hi everyone, my name is Dan Nielsen. I am the Senior Diversity and Inclusion Manager for Vodafone Group, who are proud IDA Beacon members. And I'm here today to talk to you about our response, what Vodafone are doing to support survivors of domestic violence and abuse.
Thank you so much, Dan. All right, I'm going to hand over to Sandra, who's going to chair the fireside chat between all of you, and reminder to the audience to please pose any questions that you have in the Q&A box. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. Thank you for Ida putting this conversation on. It is an important conversation, and I guess I'd like us to start by really asking that question, why is it important? And the question is, or the topic is, understanding and supporting. I see there's two areas, understanding and supporting Black employees affected by domestic abuse. And as I was thinking about this, I thought, I couldn't really start this conversation without referring back to the recent Commons Health and Social Care Committee report, which hopefully many of you have heard or seen it, which found disproportionately poor outcomes in maternity care for Black women in the UK. And I know that that's not the specific topic we'll be looking at, but I thought it was important because that, in my view, gave us a picture of the experiences of Black women here in the UK in 2025, issues of the levels of bias, stereotyping, racist assumptions, and those sorts of things. And I'm sure we'll hear about this, but from my understanding, there is a correlation between pregnancy, maternity, and domestic violence in our country. So I wanted to set that foundation in terms of our conversation today. So why is this important? And that question or that statement is, in terms of what we're looking at today, focused on employment within the working environment. So we'll be talking about that. And with that regard, the employers, what can employers do? We'll hear about that. But what's the knock-on effect in the working environment as we're looking at why is this important? Well, there are issues causing absenteeism, lateness due to maybe physical injuries, trauma, controlling behavior in the working environment, reduced concentration levels and productivity in the workplace caused by, stress and fear, mental health issues that may, in a lot of situations, go unreported, unrecognized, unsupported. And as already stated, there is the issue that Black women also struggle with the stress of navigating racism. So what are we going to be hearing this afternoon? We're going to be hearing from firsthand experience, where we'll be also looking at the question from that perspective of what would have been helpful from an employer's perspective for an employee. We'll be looking at what the data tells us that's out there. We'll also be finding out more about what type of services are available out there, both for employers and for employees. And, we've already heard, we'll be hearing from one of the IDA Beacon members as an employer and what they're doing to address domestic abuse. So a lot in store. I'm going to stop rambling. Why don't we get the rest of our panelists, and thank you all for being here, to start this process. So I'm going to go to Hassana. And basically, if you can share with us, Christabel or Hope, or both of you, what does Hassana provide?
Yeah, so I've done a bit of an introduction, but it's a lot of information to process, so it's good to do it again. Hassana is, like Christabel said, the national organization that supports all forms of gender-based violence, specifically for Black femmes. It started off as a campaign called Ask First campaign, and it's developed into Hassana today. We provide advocacy work, which includes which I think is great introduction, Sandra, things like accessing healthcare, accessing education, accessing, immigration services. The advocacy work that we do is quite specific to the experiences that are often missed in organizations that are not specifically BioFor culturally informed. We offer therapeutic services, and again, all of our therapists are Black femmes as well. So coming from that lens, I think is particularly important when accessing services like ours. We also do training, so we have plenty of training and workshops that are really diverse. We're developing new modules at the moment, which I think could be great after this to discuss further with some of your employers. But yeah, that's what we do as an organization. We do a lot of outreach work. So we're developing a scheme called Sana Spaces, where we do things that are proactive and as well as responsive. That's what Hassana does as an organization. And yeah, I'll pass over to Christopher to talk data.
Thank you so much. And Sandra, it's just me anticipating the question you're going to ask me for next anyway.
Yes, it is. The question is, because I'm looking on your website, there's an awful lot of data that you do. So tell us about a little bit about the research and what you have found in terms of what the data says.
Yeah, I guess, and by the way, we can stop sharing screen now. But when we talk about data on domestic abuse, I think one of the first questions we have to ask ourselves is whose experiences are being counted and whose experiences are being left invisible. And we know that too often Black survivors are either hidden within the broader BAME categories, or they're missing entirely from official statistics. And that invisibility has real consequences for the support survivors receive or don't receive. So looking at a few key figures here, we know that MARAC data, multi-agency data, shows us that Black women are more likely to be categorized as high risk, suggesting that physical abuse is being recognized, but coercive control and other non-physical forms of abuse are being missed. We know that Refuge has found that police are 14% more likely to refer Black women to services, 14% less likely to refer Black women to their services compared to white women. We know that Safe Lives have reported that Black survivors suffer from abuse 1.5 times longer before accessing support compared to white British survivors. We know that Surviving Economic Abuse found that Black women are twice as likely to experience economic abuse through coerced debt, stolen wages, or restricted access to banking, as well as immigration abuse. And we know that Sister Space research found that 85% of Black women did not feel sufficiently supported by non-Black advisors, and only 1% believe the system currently provided adequate support. Imagine only 1% believing that. So when you put these numbers together, there is a pattern that emerges, and Black survivors face higher barriers, longer exposure to harm, and less access to safe and culturally competent support. And I think it's also really important to focus on what the data doesn't show us. What's missing in the data is that we have almost no data on Black men experiencing domestic abuse. We have very little data on Black LGBTQ plus survivors, and we have very inconsistent data collection, which means many survivors are rendered invisible. And beyond the numbers, we also need to recognize the cultural narratives that shape how Black survivors are treated in general. So there's research by Milk Honeybees, which is a wonderful young people organization. And the research on adultification shows that Black girls are consistently viewed as older, more resilient, and less in need of protection than their white peers. And that bias doesn't appear, or that bias doesn't disappear in adulthood. It follows women into workplaces, healthcare systems, like you spoke about, Sandra. It follows them even in domestic abuse responses. And that also applies, adultification also applies to Black boys, criminal justice system, and so on, right? And alongside this is this deeply ingrained strong Black woman and strong Black man stereotype. The idea that Black women and Black men can cope with anything, and that they don't need support, and that they should endure. And while that is often framed as resilience, in reality, it too often leads to neglect, disbelief, and minimization of the harm that we're experiencing. So overall, we know also that Black women are statistically more likely to develop autoimmune disorders such as lupus, but will face delayed diagnosis and treatment because their pain is minimized or disbelieved. We know that Black men in the UK are around 6 times more likely to be sectioned under the Mental Health Act compared to white men. How do you access support when you're worried that you're going to be sectioned? How those things are so difficult. So these patterns show us that it isn't just about domestic abuse. It's about a wider system that consistently underestimates Black people's suffering and over-polices our responses. And for employers, it means that statistics are not just numbers. It means that they're a call to action for you. They tell us that Black survivors are experiencing unique and disproportionate barriers. And the challenge that you should be leaving today, the challenge that, or the question that I leave with you today is, how do I make my workplace response not replicate that invisibility? And I always say that Black people are so interesting that we are so hyper visible and invisible at the same time. Music videos, trends, bodies, and so on, food, so hyper visible. If there's anything to be said, it's so hyper visible, but yet our trauma, our pain, our experience are so invisible at the same time. So how do we step out of that? How do you see us? So I'm going to leave that there.
Yeah, wow. There is so much information there that you have shared in that short space of time. And I'll be honest, I'm sure that some people are thinking, oh my God, this is scary. This is just so much to unpick. And we will come back hopefully to some of those points later on. But wow, thank you for sharing so much of that. And I hope that what people will do is actually to go to your website and check out some more of that information and to get some more support. But we will come back to that. And I think in terms of those statistics, get my teeth in, that leads us, I think, onto really hearing from someone who has gone through this and is prepared, and I think I will say bravely putting themselves forward to share their experience. So Naomi, can I ask you to share what you're comfortable sharing about your own lived experience? So have you?
Apologies.
Right.
So today I'm going to be sharing a bit about my story and my experiences with domestic abuse and how potentially employers could have helped me and my family while I was going through that period in time. So A little bit about me. I did do an introduction earlier, but so the reason I'm here sitting in front of you all today is because of those connected experiences, those really early experiences. And thankfully, they affected me in a positive way. So, my life choices, my career choices. I've worked in domestic abuse for probably the past 15 years. So, supporting victims of domestic violence and domestic abuse, sexual violence, and stalking. I've worked in IDVA roles, domestic abuse refugees, so like supporting people when they fled the abuse, and lots of different roles in domestic abuse. So I'm qualified independent domestic abuse advisor, but the reason I'm actually in this role, or I started in this line of work, was because of my early experiences. So as I said, I also have my own company where we offer training, and we have a private and confidential IDVA advocacy and support service with a male and female IDVA. So we'll get into my story a little bit now. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have as well during, so please feel free to use the chat box. So I was a child victim, but when I say child, it was a period of 6 years. So I was actually a young teenager. During the relationship, so my mum was in the relationship for about 6 years. She became pregnant and she had a child during that relationship. And now, as an IDVA, I can actually see that it was a very high risk situation that my mum was in. So I don't have a great deal of time, so I'm not going to be able to go into everything. But some of the things that she experienced were, and myself, I actually experienced physical violence from my mum's ex-partner. So there was physical violence, coercive control, threats to kill, multiple attempts at child abduction, where my mum had the baby and he tried to take the baby, and I had to intervene. There was stalking. He actually set her car on fire, so her car was blown up, and it also impacted people around us as well, so family and friends. So I had a neighbor that lived a few doors down that was a friend, and he actually knocked on the door and attempted to stab him and harm him as well. So it was a really difficult time that I was going through, and it's something that I didn't really speak about a lot at the time. Once the relationship ended, that's when the stalking began. So she'd completely finished the relationship. He'd been removed from the property, but he'd follow her everywhere she went. So if we was going to, like, my sister's school, he'd follow her. If she was going to work, he'd follow her. If we was going out for a normal day out down the shops, just to go and get some food, he'd be following. And it's such a vivid memory for me, because I remember the car. It was a Ford. It was a light lilac color. And every single time my mum would see him, it'd always be like creeping really slowly behind us. She would literally shake in terror, she would start physically shaking. So it was really traumatic. And also, when we would come home, he'd be sitting in the car and he'd be waiting for her. And he'd call her to come and sit in the car. And if she said no, he would threaten her with a knife. So often I would be coming home with friends that I'd maybe had spoke, close friends to, about the abuse. And he'd be like, why is she sitting in the car? Why is she talking to him? I thought she said, if it's that bad, why is she sitting in the car? But he would force her with the threat of, a knife, and make her sit in the car with my younger sister for hours upon hours, just abusing her and physically abusing her. And this is something I found out later. So yeah, so you'll be happy to know she is safe now. She went to a refuge out of London, completely restarted her life. And I had the option of going, but I was really concerned about the fact that the area that she was going to, it wasn't multicultural. I would have no friends there, no support network. I would be leaving, my family that was in London. And I expressed those concerns to her as well. I was worried about my younger sister. So she was the only child of colour in her school and practically in the area. So, but the main thing was my mum was safe. So, she experienced racism, she experienced bullying as she was growing up. But that's all done now. And, my mum's happy, she settled down. And that's, yeah, it's a thing of the past. But what employers could have done, which I think, so in those days, I'm showing my age now. My mum was basically told, we don't want this attention at your workplace. It's causing too much trouble, because he would physically assault her at work. He would physically abuse her in front of customers. And one thing that I think is really important, because during a period of time I was working as well, I think I was in Sainsbury's, is for employers to ask the question. So research does show that most people won't disclose, but if you are asked, then you're more likely to disclose. So even if it's in a supervision, if you do notice that an employee is, their work's going to the wayside, that there is increased absence of work, ask the question. It doesn't have to be a direct question. You can put it into forms. Like I used to work with health services, and that's what we used to always encourage. Just ask the question, are you safe? Is there anyone you're afraid of? This is something we ask everyone in the organization. And what you will find is a lot of people will open up and end up disclosing through asking that question. So find a way to slip it in, depending on what type of organization you have, whether it's clinical supervision or normal supervision. Do not send someone home if you know that they're at immediate risk. I know this sounds like common sense, but as I said, my mum was getting physically assaulted at work, and she, there's a lot of victim blaming. She was sent home. Have resources and material available that represents, people of colour, represents everyone. And then people were more likely to feel that that they want to disclose. Also, it's got to be a case by case scenario, but facilitate if that person needs to speak to the police or a support service in work hours. If it is a really high risk case, also facilitate that as well. Look at flexible working options, working from home and stuff like that. But I think the most important thing, and sorry if I'm speaking really fast, I'm really aware of the time, the most important thing is just to treat it as a case by case scenario. Everyone's going to have different things going on, different barriers, but just to listen and make it employee led. Don't think this is our policy and this is what we're supposed to be doing and this is what we've been told. Find out what's going to help and make your employees safe. Find out what their specific barriers are, because we say the Black community, but everyone in the Black community is going to have different barriers. And what you often find is the Black community is grouped together, and there's lots of different barriers that individual communities will face. So I think, make it employee led and listen and just try and accommodate in the best way possible. Really apologize. That was really rushed. I've got so much to say and so much to tell about my story, but I am limited on time. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Naomi. That is, wow. I really appreciate your being so open to sharing even, what you did share. And I personally can feel, into that situation and understand where you went through. Similarly, this is not something that we tend to talk about, our experiences, especially if there's violence in the home. I share some of those experiences in my own personal life, but we, especially Black women, don't talk about it because there's a stigma that is associated with that. We'll get to maybe talking about that going forward, but there's a lot of stigma associated with it. And when you do have employers that say, we don't want the trouble, we don't want the fuss, well, where do you go? So thank you very much for sharing that. Some really good tips there as well. Thank you. So now I'm going to bring the only man on this panel. Hello, Dan.
Hello.
So Dan, you tell us, you work for Vodafone, you mentioned that. And one of the main points within this conversation is looking at what employers need to know, what can they do. So tell us about the approach that Vodafone has taken and what you're doing.
Of course, no worries. And I just want to say thank you again, Naomi, as well, for sharing your story. That was really impactful and a lot of lessons every employer can learn from what you said there at the end as well. So at Vodafone, how do we support survivors of domestic violence and abuse? So in 2019, we conducted some research. So our charitable arm of our organisation, the Vodafone Foundation, we worked with them and different domestic violence and abuse organisations to look at some research of how employers can support survivors. From that research, we found that 1 in 3 women globally are impacted by domestic violence and abuse. And if we looked at our footprint in Vodafone today, some of the countries we operate in, that actually rises to nearly 1 in 2 women as well. So we knew that this was a world of work issue. Being a survivor, impacts every facet of a survivor's life, their social life, and their work life as well. So we need to recognize that and put measures in place to be able to support survivors. So we created our global policy and our toolkit. Our policy has been translated into all the languages available in all our markets as well, so it's accessible by everybody. And all of the measures in place are the same across all of our markets. What the policy does, it offers dedicated paid safe leave every single year for survivors. To get that paid leave, they don't need to input it to any system or anything like that. They just need to talk to their line manager and say, I need to take the dedicated paid safe leave. No questions will be asked and they can take it. So it is completely confidential. It doesn't go past that one person or whoever the survivor wishes to tell as well. And it's not logged in our system. So no one on the back end of any HR systems can see that this leave has been taken for that specific survivor too. As part of that, though, just implementing a policy and a toolkit around awareness isn't enough. Not everyone reads a policy or knows about it. Not everyone reads a toolkit. So we needed to introduce some training and truly embed it within the people in the organization who can support survivors. So that was training for our HR people, all our line managers as well. And we trained them in the method of recognizing, responding, and referring to. So everyone was trained across that and then had access to resources. We partnered with different organizations. We became an IDA Beacon member. Organizations like Hope After Harm, Hestia as well, or different organizations we part with, and provided training for all of these people that needed to do it. But we also provided training for the points of contact we needed to support a survivor. So that was the people within the IT department, if they needed a change of email address, for instance. People in security, if they needed to be aware of anybody who might be coming to an office, to be able to ensure they didn't get access to the building to support survivors as well and keep them safe. So all that provision of support was created. And the Vodafone Foundation, also in partnership with Hestia and Hope After Harm, created an app which is available to all publicly on the App Store or the Android version, called Bright Sky. And this is specifically for survivors as well to get access to resources and support. It has helplines and it's available across 13 of our countries that we operate in. And also the markets where it's not available, there are other apps available in those markets to support survivors as well, which we have collaborated with. So in 2019, that is what we did. We then realized we need to do more. Okay, we've got the policy in place. We've raised some awareness. We've trained our HR and line managers, but we need to really, again, continue to embed this amongst our employees. So last year, we launched our Allies Against Abuse network. We partnered with Hope After Harm, who provided the Rise for Change training. It's a CPD accredited training, and we offered that to our employees across our footprint and our markets to become allies to support survivors of domestic violence and abuse. They again were all trained in the recognise, respond and refer, but this goes beyond just the line managers and just HR and just IT and security. It's people who every day in the office you work with will have the tools equipped to be able to recognise the signs of domestic violence and abuse and support survivors as well. We've currently got over 200 allies to date, and we offer annual training for all of our allies, and we do training, the same Rise for Change training as well, to recruit more allies to continue to grow that network as well. After reading the research and the IDA's, again, note on how to support the Black experience, we realised that at Vodafone, we need to do more as well. We've got all this great support network that supports survivors. What we need to do is recognise the different barriers and challenges that people in the Black community face in order to support them better as well. So what we will be doing over the next 6 to 12 months in embedding this within our already existing structures is we want to train all of our allies on that Black experience, but collaborating with a by and for organisation. And actually on Friday, I'm meeting with Christabel and Hope to talk to them about providing this training as well. So we're already starting that process. We're able to do that too. We have Bright Sky. We are going to be working with the team who own Bright Sky and the developers for that to ensure that organisations like Hasana, Sister Space, are embedded within Bright Sky as well. So all those helplines are there, so there are by and for organisations for survivors, but also creating sections within the Bright Sky app and the website specifically on the Black community. So there are resources in there and support available for them as well. We're going to be updating our toolkit as well. So we want to be adding resources to that specifically talking about the challenges that the Black community face, and we're going to expand that to other intersectional identities over the next 12 months as well.
So thank you, Dan. That is a really comprehensive bit of work that you and your organization have been working on and planning in terms of moving forward. So it would be, great to see how that continues and the impact. Now, what I'm going to do at this point is invite all of the other members of the panelists in so we can have a further sort of joint conversation looking at from your experience, and this is going out to all of you, based on what we've heard from each other so far, and remember the question is, for me, understanding, it's a two-part understanding, but also what can be done, understanding and support. So what do employers need to know, do you think, about how to support Black employees going through domestic abuse in their lives at this point in time? If you could share just one thing, what would that one thing be? What do they need to know? Anybody can talk to me.
I would say it's about the confidentiality thing as well. So speaking from my experience, you're thinking about your workplace or your colleagues, management, you're not going to want to speak about, and it probably goes for all victims as well, but you're not going to want to speak about it freely. So having some type of confidential, multiple different routes at, possibly disclosing and talking about it, I think is extremely important. And I think it could be the difference between, especially if I'm thinking about myself, of talking about my experience at the time or not, or whether I just kept it to myself. So as I said, it might not be specific, but I think it's extremely important that that's in place.
Thank you. That I would agree with you. What are some of the workplace barriers that you think exist? I'm going to throw this out to Christabel.
I think definitely the fact that you're not just experiencing domestic abuse in a vacuum. One of the biggest barriers is the fact that if you do not feel comfortable and safe at work in general, you're also not likely to disclose anything else, right? If I am experiencing microaggressions, I call them macro. If I am experiencing conscious bias, I don't believe in unconscious bias. You have one chance at unconscious bias, and it's not unconscious anymore. So you know what you're doing. So yeah. I'm experiencing very conscious bias and so on. When it comes to other things, how do you then expect me to be safe enough or feel comfortable enough to share this deeply personal, private part of my life with you? You can't create or write domestic abuse policies and create this domestic, provide support around therapy when the entire rest of the culture of your company, of the organization, doesn't feel safe anyway. So it doesn't sit in isolation. Everything that you're doing works together. And also, abuse and violence is political. You cannot not be, all forms of violence political, the way we experience it and who perpetrates it, right? So we can't be silent around certain things and then think that people will be safe when they come to us with the violence that they experience, when we're very silent about the violence they experience outside of the workplace.
Yeah, really good points there. Dan, you've shared a huge amount of work that Vodafone has done and is doing and plans to do. But what were some of the barriers that as an employer you encountered?
I think it was, and we've alluded to it, that fear of coming forward. I think every survivor will have a fear of coming forward, but I think particularly if we're talking about Black employees as well, if they, like Christabel's alluded to, if they can't come forward in the workplace or feel psychologically safe in the workplace about anything that's not to do with domestic violence and abuse, how are they going to do that about something that's so sensitive and so personal to them and it impacts their life every day to an organization? And so through awareness of our policy and our toolkit and the training and the campaigns that we do internally and externally as well, we are breaking some of those barriers down for people to feel psychologically safe to come forward and talk about it. And again, what we're going forward, how we want to do that for Black people is partnering with organizations like Hasana and doing these campaigns, making this awareness internally so that Black employees who are survivors feel seen, they feel recognized, and that they can come forward. So it's all about creating that psychologically safe space for people to come forward. And we've done that, I would hope, through the kind of campaigns and the awareness that we have done.
Yeah, I mean, you've touched on a really important point there from the perspective, I think, as a Black individual myself. And one of the things that we find is that organizations want to do stuff, but they want to do it in a vacuum of their own organization, that reaching out and actually working with the community that they're supposed to be and want to serve is something that they themselves are scared to do. I mean, how did you approach that? Was that an issue for you?
I think when in the creation of this, I mean, I think it still is an issue. I'm going to be perfectly honest. We haven't had any survivors come forward and say to us, non-anonymously. So they'll come forward anonymously and told us, like, we've used the policy, we've accepted it, but no one yet is willing to still come forward and share their story internally at Vodafone. And I'll be honest about that. So I think there is still work there we need to do to allow people to raise their hand and be open about it. We know people are using the policy and using the toolkit, but I still think there is still work there to do to break those barriers still.
Yeah, I would agree 100%, because there is a culture of silence, isn't there?
Yeah.
There's a culture of silence. And I'm going to come back to Hassana because of your data, facts, and figures. In terms, you might get women coming forward, but what is the situation with men experiencing violence? In the home or anywhere else? What's the take up? What's in terms of reaching out, responding, looking for help? This is Hope or Christabel. Don't both shout at the same time, we won't hear you.
No, I'm struggling slightly with that question because Fasana specifically supports Black femmes. But what I did want to say on the previous question, which maybe someone will be able to link into this, is employers can actually, in terms of being an advocate for preventing domestic abuse, employers can actually replicate abuse. And I think it's actually important to, investigate that. Employers can act in ways that replicate their coercive control at home, like policing what they wear, how much time they spend, who they're speaking to, if they're late, if they're where they are at what time, constant monitoring. Like Christabel said, I call it not even macroaggressions, I call it violence. If you're commenting on someone's appearance, if you're making them feel threatened or intimidated or frightened or not wanting to go to work, that is also replicating the domestic abuse household and environment. And so, you can't sort of swoop in and say all of a sudden, you're going to be able to support domestic abuse when, like, psychologically you are replicating that, and you are also, as much as people might not want to come to work just as much as they don't want to go home, and I think that's an important thing to really investigate. I think let's walk before you can run is what I would say in terms of employers talking about domestic abuse, specifically for people of color and Black survivors. I don't know, if anyone wants to add anything.
Black men in general, like I said, there aren't services. There is no specific by for service for Black men who are experiencing domestic abuse within this country, which is a problem in itself. There is also no specific Black gender-based violence LGBT plus service. So that's also another thing. So I think when we're looking at that, there are so many barriers, because you have this idea of Black men are so angry and they're so aggressive, and masculinity. And that all of the things that we learn from the outside world, we eventually internalize. Right? So now we believe it, and now we don't think. And if we don't unlearn that behavior, it's quite harmful for us ourselves. It's quite isolating. It's quite dangerous. It's quite lonely. A place to be, a very lonely place for Black men to be. And that sisterhood or femmehood that we find in our services, that doesn't exist like structurally for them. And that is what's missing. So there is something about employers making sure that they are creating that space, again, that they are not not assuming that Black men, when you think of survivors, and Hope always makes that example, and I love that. When you think of survivorhood or what a survivor looks like, you never think of Black man.
Yeah.
If somebody says, imagine a survivor, you would never imagine a Black man. And that is our problem.
Yeah, so that really talks about the stereotypes and the biases that we have in our society, and that naturally is gonna fall into the workplace environment and how people are seen and that sort of thing. Thank you. Some really
I was going to
good
say, like,
points.
in all my years that I've worked as an IDVA, I've never had a black male victim. But personally, I know two men, because where I've worked in the field so long, obviously people talk to you, two men that have told me that they, and these are friends, that they've experienced domestic abuse from their partners, so their girlfriend or their wife. And the way they've kind of spoke about it is like it's very normalized. You know, I'm a man, I know what I could do back. You know, I'm just not a violent person, so I wouldn't do anything back. So it's a kind of like an acceptance of the behavior. And like other men have barriers as well, that just embarrassed to really talk about it is what I found.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good point. So it's not that they're not out there, it's
Oh yeah,
that
they're definitely there.
it's, yeah, they either, as you say, normalize it, or maybe they feel that they won't be accepted or recognized or whatever, so they don't talk about it. Hope, have you got your hand up?
Yeah, I do. I just wanted to add something quickly on that as well. I think Christopher mentioned that there's no support services that are specifically for Black queer communities. And so when specifically in the Black queer community, when you're accessing support or you need support, you are protective of the Black community and you're protective of your queer identity. And when you are a victim of abuse, that correlate collates both of those identities, there is a real sense of, like shame or a real sense of protectiveness of the communities that you're from, because you don't want to represent them in a certain way, particularly if you're from a culture or background or family that doesn't accept your queerness, for example. So, how are you gonna disclose domestic abuse to a family that is already not accepting of your queerness, and the abuse is from a queer relationship? And same with sapphic relationships as well. It's seen as in sapphic relationships between women, the way we talk about abuse is always male perpetrator, female victim, right? We never talk about abuse in terms of both sapphic relationships, where it's very prevalent. It's very, very prevalent. And I think that's a real important. This term intersectionality doesn't mean just one section that isn't white or male. It means that you can be Black and queer and disabled and trans and all of these things, and they all exist at the same time. Christopher always says, not a sum of its parts. It happens all at the same time. You're all of these things at the same time. And I think that's a really, really important thing to investigate when we're talking about male survivors.
Yeah, thank you. And there is so much in terms of the employers on this call, and we'll listen back to this to realize that there's so much more understanding that is needed, and awareness and analysis of our own biases in terms of our expectations and what we consider to be right or the norm or anything else. Now, I'm conscious that we do have some questions coming in by those participants, and I know I want to give us time to begin to look at those. So I'm going to see if I can have a quick look at that. I know, Kirsten, you're in the background. There you are. I can see you now. So I'm gonna hand over this side to you. But thank you, everybody. That's really been good. Thank you.
Thank you so much to everyone for your amazing reflections. And I will say a lot of what has been mentioned here is echoed in the guidance resource that we developed for employers. If you haven't had a chance to look at that yet, please go to our website and check it out, because it includes lots of really useful tips on how you can implement the learnings from this panel in your organizations. I just want to quickly revert back to the topic of men, but from a slightly different angle, because we have a question from Jerome, who says, we've been working hard to address our internal culture towards gender-based violence and racism. In some of our work, it's been highlighted that not all men share the same power, especially the higher up in the seniority ladder you go. Can the panel share their thoughts on how we can support Black men seeking to be active bystanders in their efforts to challenge misogyny. So maybe something that's a little bit more internal to the community, but also in the workplace.
I'm going to jump in. Not that I think I know as much as anybody else, but I think some of this needs to start with awareness and training of the individual. So a safe space, it all comes back to having that safe space, whether it's in the workplace or in the community, but having that safe space where people feel that they can share. Black men particularly feel that they can share what they've been through, what they're going through, and what they see. And I'm using this with quotation marks, what they see as weaknesses or they perceive that society sees as weaknesses. So creating safe spaces where they can get coaching, mentoring, training, that sort of thing would be my suggestion as a first place.
And can I say, I think like really specific tailored training is really important, because the way we or employers might imagine that domestic abuse presents, it's the general, man against woman. But as someone said in the comments, it could be children against parents, it could be FGM. There's so many different ways that it presents, and I think it's really important that staff that are trained in it or are available to support employees are aware of the different ways that it does present.
Hope as well, I think you have your hand up.
Yeah, I would say, echoing a lot of those points, I think community bystander intervention, I think, is incredibly important. It's something that Hasana offers and is doing training on annually. But I went to a Black Lives Matter conference, and it was culturally informed community bystander intervention, because internally Black femmes can look at Black men as our brothers. There's a certain, like, the uncle that looks after me, and this, that, and the third, and there is almost more safety in having Blackness in common, but the positionality of a man. However, we should also consider that Black men are more likely to get stopped and searched, more likely to get questioned by the police, more likely to be sectioned, all of these kind of things. And so there's a certain level of expectation that we should always place on people who are vulnerable to state violence. So it's an interesting conversation, and I think it's something that has to happen within the communities, within Black communities, but it should be funded, facilitated by employers. And I think that's the part that we are, it's all here. Finding the money, time, and resources and access to employees, and just people in the community, I think, is the important thing. And I think that should be a takeaway for employers listening today.
Thank you so much. I hope that's a really good point. And on the topic of employer resourcing, we've also got a question from Hadley that asks, outside of HR strategy within policies, etc., I think developing a workplace culture is essential to generate a space that is approachable and safe for those to speak about individual experiences. Do you think that HR members being more approachable in everyday work life makes a difference? And building on this, it's kind of how an employee working HR or otherwise, but slightly lower level seniority also within a company can make a difference. I'll let Dan go first on that one if you'd like, Dan.
First of all, your HR should be approachable anyway, regardless. So that's the first issue, that HR should be approachable. But yes, culture is set from the top, right? You need to have a psychologically safe workplace, and it's set from the top, and it's set by your leaders. So they're the ones who need to be driving that culture. Employee networks, people at my level trying to drive culture doesn't work unless the people above you, the people making the decisions, that organization, change it and want to change it. So that culture needs to come from them. You need to have, if you are wanting to do a campaign, whether it's around gender-based violence, whether it's around specifically the Black experience around gender-based violence, you need to have a leader on top who's supporting this, sponsoring it, and driving that as well, because you can't do it by yourselves. They're the ones who set the tone for the company and the culture. There's a lot of work happening internally at Vodafone around culture change as well. At the moment, we're bringing leaders on board to all these different kinds of topics to really start driving that as well. So it's not just that HR has to be more approachable, which they should be anyway. It should be your leaders setting that example and driving that change.
I could not agree more. Thank you so much, Dan. Christabel.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And you know what? Do I think HR is approachable? One thing that you will ask, I remember when the conversation at the beginning of the year was the bear or the man, and then somebody changed it to HR, a white HR lady or a bear, and the Black community said we'll choose the bear, right? So again, we have to be very, very mindful here that actually majority of people of color don't feel as safe with HR, don't feel like HR is on their side genuinely. And so what does that look like? I think making sure that the relationship between HR and everybody else is clearly defined. And if that relationship is not that close, that we're making it better, that we're having relationships and we're talking, we're very mindful about the way we talk about people and how we do it and how we talk to them. I think it's so mindful. But also another thing for me personally, I've lost my train of thought. But yeah, I was just very mindful that HR is not the go-to and be all for everybody else. But also, yes, I was going to say, allyship is not cheap. I always say that. Allyship will cost you. If it doesn't cost you, it's not allyship. If it's not a sacrifice, if you're not paying for it, you're not doing enough. That's when you know you need to do more, you need to sacrifice more. And the fact is that organizations, even if without an EDI department, which I totally get, not everybody's big enough, we are not consultants. They are consultants. There are people here like Sandra, Naomi, and other people who do consultancy, who can come and support you with that, who won't charge you a year's rate, right? They have day rates. And so these are the ways that we need to work. You still have the opportunity to work with people because it will cost you something. And if you are looking for allyship that doesn't cost you anything, we have to have a deeper conversation.
Thank you, Christopher. And Hope, finally.
Just quickly, HR does not have to be approachable or friendly or personable, but they have to be professional. And I would much rather go to a HR department that I know is training, that I know will follow procedure and has policy and is strict, and I don't have to, kiki with you in the corridor or in the tea room, but I trust that you're a professional organization, and I think that especially with the, with working culture and in groups and out groups, people of color are usually always on the out group. And so it's not about, workplace drinks and relationships. It's about strict professional services where I know that you have all these organizations that I can access, and I know that you take things seriously. And I think people talk, by the way. So if someone does come forward to HR and it doesn't get dealt with in a certain way, you've lost a whole demographic. So I think professional rather than personal is what I would say.
Thank you so much, Hope. And I just want to squeeze in one more question before we have to wrap up. But I'm going to quickly insert a little bit of a plug for Ida's resources to answer another one, which is what types of support or resources are available for a colleague who believes they may be exhibiting abusive or controlling behaviors in a domestic context and want to address this proactively. So I think I just want to plug that the work on perpetrators and the people who use abusive behaviors, that's very much in its infancy stage for a lot of employers in the UK. That being said, there are multiple things that you can do as a workplace, not least making sure that you've got everything in order legally, making sure that you mention perpetrators in your policy and your written guidance so that you as an organization are protected to take a stance on it should you have any perpetrator employees. Secondly, signposting to perpetrator behavior change programs is a crucial part of having a domestic abuse response in the workplace, and IDA also provides guidance resources on this. So I just want to quickly get that one out of the way. Sorry, panel, for bypassing you on that one, because I would really like to ask you this question specifically, which is, would it help to have a woman, or perhaps a man, of color as a champion of domestic abuse for the BAME community, or do you think that this would encourage segregation? I want to treat everyone equally, but be mindful of people's lived experience. So perhaps in a workplace context, that would be having a person of color, maybe a Black employee, on perhaps the domestic abuse working group, or having them be a domestic abuse champion in the workplace. Any thoughts on this?
I can go first if you want. So I think we always have to be very mindful of what we call the minority tax, right? So if you want to be doing things for communities, consult communities for their lived experience, their advice, but don't expect them to want you to run it or to do it. Okay, it's not on them to do that. It's for us. That's our job to do that. So I'd say be very, very careful when doing that as well. I think whether it's I personally would not put a black person if they didn't want to in front of a campaign or a program or something that you're going to do for Black people. One, I think it's more impactful if you have someone who is genuine and an ally standing up and doing that. But then you should be consulting with the community to make sure that the path that you're on, the things that you want to do, are correct and it addresses their needs. But my view is just, don't put the onus on a Black person to front a solution for Black people.
That's really useful. Thank you so much, Dan. I'm afraid we have come to the end of today's session. So I just want to thank you so much to all of our guest speakers for sharing your knowledge, for sharing your experience. And we truly appreciate how little attention this topic receives overall in society, not least in an employment context. So we're so grateful to you for highlighting how important this is and how all employers can make a difference. We're going to be sharing the recording of today's session, so keep an eye out for that in your emails. Again, do follow us on LinkedIn and Blue Sky to follow this campaign and all of our other work. And all IDA members can access the employer guidance resource and our entire suite of resources in the member resource page. And IDA membership is free. I want to do a plug for our next Insight Hour, which is going to be on the 18th of November, and it will focus on how to communicate effectively around domestic abuse, specifically focusing on the 16 Days of Activism campaign that is coming up towards the end of the year. We would really love to hear your feedback on this session, so please take 2 minutes to share your views through the link in the chat box. And without further ado, thank you everyone for your insights, and I'll leave people to drop off.